Hi, and welcome to Mia Minutes. I'm Craig the Chief of Communications here at the Maryland Insurance Administration. And I have with me today Maryland Insurance Commissioner Kathleen Borain.
Hi, thank you. Lovely to be with you today.
So Kathleen, I wanted to speak with you about artificial intelligence today. You know, artificial intelligence is all over the news. It's on radio, TV, social media, everywhere. But I'm not sure that many folks realize that AI impacts insurance. Can you explain for our viewers and listeners the relationships between AI and insurance?
Sure. So I think the first thing is to have some agreement about what we mean when we say AI and when we say artificial intelligence, because there are lots of different kinds of definitions. But for our purposes today, what most people are usually talking about are kind of two buckets of activities. The first one has to do with looking at a whole lot of information, a whole lot of data, and then using very sophisticated computing and algorithmic techniques to mine that data to find patterns and information that we can then use to predict the future or to make it easier to do something in the future. So that's one bucket of more traditional, if you will, analytical AI systems that help make decisions. And then you have a different bucket, which people are sort of most familiar with in terms of generative AI and large language models, which are the things where you can kind of put in a bunch of questions and then generate material from that. So there are lots of uses of that because that's a technology that takes a bunch of existing information and then rearranges it in a way. So in insurance, you have both of those things happen, right? So insurance has always been all about trying to predict the future.
Mm-hmm.
You buy insurance today in order to protect you if something happens in the future. And so insurance companies are saying, well, if I'm going to provide that financing, if I'm going to provide that claim payment, things like what do I have to charge today in order to have enough money to be able to respond to that in the future. And for auto and homeowners, those are shorter cycles because those are one-year policies. But if you're looking at, say, a life insurance policy or a long-term care policy, those payments don't happen for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years in the future. So insurance companies have always been in the business of looking at lots of information and then predicting things from that in order to set their costs and decide who they're going to sell insurance to and what their investments need to look like. Now they have the ability to do that using some of these very sophisticated technological computational methods that are run by machines and computers.
Yes.
So that's an example of how we've taken something we've always done and we've made it much more sophisticated, and the ability to use more data in order to get more and more detail is a big part of what insurance companies are using those kind of technologies for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the rapid rise and use of artificial intelligence and other technologies create opportunity, but also they raise concerns. What are some of the positives of AI when it comes into the insurance industry? You've touched on that a little bit. What are some of the others?
So we can look at situations where there may be a type of risk that companies are not sure how to price. They're not sure they even want to take that risk. So the ability to rapidly look at data about what is happening with respect to certain kinds of losses. Cybersecurity is a really good example where it's really hard to figure out what to charge today in order to cover events in the future. So as events unfold, what AI does is give you the ability to sift through a whole lot of information really, really quickly in nanoseconds to find information and patterns that will help you do those pricing. So the advent of these types of techniques, these predictive models that are driven by algorithms and machine learning capabilities are really things that allow the markets to be more nimble and to cover risks that they might not otherwise cover. It's also a way in which companies can get more what we call segmented in insurance. Like, we don't go to the insurance company like a grocery store and everybody pays the same amount for a loaf of bread, right? So if you get the same exact coverage, right, if it's a loaf of bread, you all pay the amount. But that's not really fair because some people are very careful, cautious drivers who never have an incident, and some people are like playing bumper cars every time they get on the road. So, the things that insurance companies do is they try to segment and right size that risk, and they use data and patterns within data to do that. So The use of artificial intelligence makes that a simpler process. Chat box function,
Right.
is an area where you see a lot of AI use, and the ability to provide better search responses. So when you go into a website and you're looking for information, how does that information come to you?
Yeah.
Does it come to you maybe in a very detailed paragraph form? We've all had the experience of calling a customer service number and being transferred to 20 different people.
Yep.
And every time you call, you have to repeat the whole thing. Well, AI, and generative AI in particular, is something that's being piloted in order to prevent those experiences, right? So you get onto a call center, that information all downloads, it's recognized, it carries you forever. So there are lots of techniques to make that consumer experience easier and better. Lots of ways in which it's being used.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the flip side there, what are some of the concerns? What are you concerned about when it comes to AI and insurance?
Well, what you're always fundamentally concerned about with any machine is the machine accurate? Can you believe what the machine tells you? So, and accurate in several ways. First of all, at the most basic level, if you've got a predictive model that you're using in order to make decisions about people, is the model accurate? Does it make the decision? Does it get to the heart of what that decision really is? So there's that basic understanding. If it gives you information, is it accurate information, or has it gone out and come up with all kinds of crazy hallucinations, all of those kinds of things that can happen. So that's the fundamental question. Does the machine get it right? But even deeper than that, and as a part of that, and a particular focus of does the machine get it right, is does it get it wrong? In that it incorporates sort of the same kind of biases that exist throughout our culture, whether they're implicit or whether they're explicit, and decisions are being made on characteristics that are completely irrelevant or completely inappropriate. So where is the bias that's in the data to begin with? What is the bias in how questions and algorithms are being formed? And is it going to result in a set of decisions that will impact consumers in a negative way with literally no justification? And is it going to be discriminatory?
Sure. You've done extensive work on this issue as chair of the Innovation, Cybersecurity, and Technology Committee of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, known as NIIC. First of all, please explain to our viewers and listeners the role the NIIC plays in insurance regulation across the country.
So I'm the Maryland Insurance Commissioner, and every state has an insurance commissioner, as does every territory in the District of Columbia. So you have 56 what we call insuring jurisdictions in the United States, and each one of them has a lead supervisor. And all of us as lead supervisors are members of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And we exist and we come together in order to do several things. One is to share information, and the second is to really make policy to the extent it's appropriate, to have standardized rules and approaches to regulation, particularly on very large and significant issues, to make sure that we are all agreed as to what it means for a company to be solvent and to act well within the market. So we get together on a very frequent basis. We share ideas across our states, we develop uniform policies, and we work together in enforcement activities.
So the committee you chair released what is called a model bulletin on the use of artificial intelligence by insurers. Before we get into the content, what is a bulletin, and why does the NIIC release model bulletins?
Sure. So this committee that I chair, the Innovation, Technology, Cybersecurity Committee, was formed, we call it the H Committee, was formed in 2022 in order to focus the NIIC's regulatory work as it relates to the use of those innovative technologies by industry and the impact that that has on privacy and cybersecurity related issues. So we brought the work of the NIIC in those areas in under that one umbrella so that we could be consistent across all product lines. Now, when a committee is formed, it has a set of work groups and charges that look at particular areas of regulatory oversight within its scope.
Yeah.
And so part of the job of the committee is to look and say, are there gaps in the laws? Are there gaps in regulations? Do we need to add in
Sure.
some additional laws? Or do we have an existing regulatory structure, but we need to work on how that structure applies to a new set of circumstances?
Yes.
And so what we decided as a body, the NIIC as a body, was that we do have a set of laws that govern decision making by insurance companies. So when insurance companies make decisions that are going to have impacts on their policyholders, their applicants, their existing insureds, we want to make sure that those decisions are made according to a set of standards. And those
Right.
standards
So uniform
exist
standards,
within our existing law.
Yeah.
So from our perspective, we already regulate important decision making by insurance companies. Now we want to talk about what happens if you use a particular technology to make those decisions, knowing that that technology brings with it some particular concerns and risks because it is very opaque, it's very complicated. When it deploys, it doesn't deploy in 1 or 2 or 3 situations. It deploys very, very broadly, often across the entire nation with models that are going to impact, tens of thousands of consumers. So given those things, how do we want to make sure that insurance companies are following the rules that they have to follow about decision making? So the technique that states always use when they're doing that is really providing regulatory guidance. So interpreting what must the company do, what can the company not do in order to meet its legal obligations under the existing law. And so that, in most states, is called a bulletin. That regulatory guidance is called a bulletin. And so as we came together as a body at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, what we ultimately determined was that we needed to establish that guidance for insurance companies. So that was going to be our, and has been our next incremental step, is how do we apply existing laws as they relate to certain kinds of decision making? How do we apply those laws when the technique being used is driven by artificial intelligence?
Maryland has adopted in this bulletin?
Yes. So what happens is that, we worked through it as a body for, about a 6 to 8 month period. We had public hearings, we adjusted it, and ultimately it was unanimously adopted by the entire NIIC membership in our meeting in December of 2023. You then go through a process where each state looks at the bulletin, looks at bulletins they may already have in place. So they may not need to adopt the new bulletin. They've already addressed this issue in this way. The other states will need to customize it a bit to conform to their state's laws. So that's what we did in Maryland. We took the model bulletin, which uses model laws, and then we conformed the bulletin to comply with Maryland-specific laws and regulations.
Right.
But the heart of the bulletin is, in Maryland, is identical to the model.
Right. So what's the future hold now, Kathleen, as far as the NIIC and your committee and about AI? Where do you see it going?
Let me talk just a second about what the model does.
Oh, absolutely.
And what the bulletin does, because I think that will inform what it is, what the future winds up looking like. So what the model does is it makes it clear that these sophisticated technologies are good. Innovations are good. They make it easier for people to buy insurance. They often make insurance more affordable because they right-size the risk. There are lots of benefits to the use of these technologies, but there are risks for the reasons that I've talked about, and therefore we have a set of expectations of how companies will conduct themselves when they are developing or deploying these AI decisional systems. So every insurance company needs to have a written program in which they identify how it is that they're using these technologies, and they look at what we call the governance of those activities. So where do you get your data, and how do you know it's accurate data, and do you look for bias within the data? So how are you treating the data? So all of those types of topics around governance and about risk management, understanding, well, what are the risks? How might we get it wrong? If we get it wrong, what kind of harm is it going to do? The more harm you can do, the better controls you have to have. And how are you validating the accuracy? Is the machine doing what you asked it to do, what you expected it to do? Can you believe the machine at the end of the day? So the bulletin addresses that at a relatively high level in saying you have to have a program, you program needs to consider these things.
Mhm.
And here's some information and insight about how we as regulators will evaluate your use of these technologies. The next steps forward have to do with A, monitoring its implementation,
Right.
and then two, beginning to build out those regulatory tools for regulators so that they can appropriately evaluate the written programs. And then probably the next most important two steps are, how do we address third-party vendors, so the
Mhm.
folks that we don't
Yes.
regulate and insurance companies buy products from? So what does that regulatory framework look like? What are our expectations of carriers as to the kind of analysis they will do, the kind of certainty that they will have about their ability to responsibly use data that they get from somebody else or models that they buy from somebody else? And then I think the last piece of it is that we will have to continue to evolve as the science evolves.
Yes.
So as we learn more, we will develop
Right.
more and better incremental regulatory oversight tools.
Technology
to
never
assure
stops.
That
Yeah.
technology never stops,
Right,
and
yeah.
therefore the regulator's approach to technology can never stop.
Right. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today about artificial intelligence. Really
It's my
appreciate
pleasure. My favorite topic.
it.